You know, when we think about what leads a country to war, we often jump straight to armies, economics, the big tangible stuff. But what if the most powerful force was actually an idea? In the years leading up to World War II, Japan took a path that changed the world. And today, we're going to explore how a very specific, very powerful form of nationalism grabbed hold of an entire nation and pointed it directly towards conflict.
And really, it all boils down to this one single phrase: a belief in Japan's unique national destiny. Now let that sink in for a second. This isn't just about loving your country, right? That's patriotism. This is something else entirely. It's the belief that your nation has a preordained, special role to play, a purpose that makes you different from, maybe even superior to, everyone else. And an idea like that, well, that can be incredibly powerful and incredibly dangerous.
And that's really the core question we're tackling here. What actually happens when an entire nation gets swept up in the idea that it has a unique destiny? I mean, how does something so abstract, a belief, turn into something so concrete, like tanks rolling and battleships sailing?
Okay, so to really get our heads around this, let's do something a little different. We're going to start at the end and work our way back. The end result of this whole unique destiny idea was, well, an empire's ambition. A really aggressive expansion that honestly left the rest of the world completely stunned.
And this is what that ambition looked like in the real world. You look at the 1930s, and Japan's foreign policy just gets more and more aggressive. But here's the key. This wasn't just a series of random isolated events. No way. This was a deliberate policy, and it was being fueled by that potent cocktail of ideology, politics, and institutional shifts, all spinning around this one core idea: nationalism.
Okay, so if nationalism was the engine driving this whole thing, what was the fuel? To get to the bottom of this, we really have to break down the specific beliefs that made this ideology so powerful. What were the actual ideas that could convince millions of people that war was the right path?
Well, at the absolute core of it all, you've got this one incredibly powerful concept: kokutai. Roughly, it means national essence. And the idea was this: Japan's specialness came from its sacred, unbroken line of emperors, with the emperor himself being seen as, well, divine. So think about what that means. Being loyal to the emperor isn't just a political thing, it's a spiritual duty. He wasn't just the head of state. In a very real sense, the emperor was the nation.
And right there, that's where this idea starts to have a huge impact on foreign policy. The historian John W. Dower argues it created a kind of moral absolutism. And just think about that for a minute. If you believe every action your country takes is in service of a divine emperor, how do you compromise? Compromise suddenly looks like weakness, even dishonor. Diplomacy? That can be seen as failing your sacred duty. All of a sudden, expanding the empire isn't just a strategic choice, it's a moral imperative.
So that's one piece of the puzzle. The second major ingredient was a deep, simmering resentment toward the West. See, Japan had been on the winning side of World War I. They show up to the Versailles Peace Conference expecting a seat at the big table, and instead, they feel like they're treated like a second-class power. They point to racial inequality in the proceedings, they get hit with naval treaties that limit their power, and they feel a constant disrespect from the US and Britain. All of this created this powerful sense of national humiliation that just festered. And the result of all that resentment? It's pretty predictable, right? It fueled a total rejection of the whole international system. I mean, think about it. Why would you play by the rules of a game you believe is rigged against you from the start? This mindset pushed Japan further and further away from things like the League of Nations and onto its own much more defiant, go-it-alone path.
All right, the final piece of this ideological puzzle is an idea called Pan-Asianism. And here's the pitch. Japan, as the most powerful, industrialized nation in Asia, had a moral mission, a duty to liberate the rest of the continent from Western colonial rule. As the historian Louise Young points out, this was a brilliant piece of framing. It gave them a noble-sounding, almost heroic justification for what was really just building their own empire.
So let's recap. You've got these three powerful ideas swirling around: a divine emperor, a deep-seated grievance against the West, and this so-called moral mission in Asia. But that still leaves a huge question. How do ideas, even powerful ones, actually take control of a government? How do you get from words to weapons? This next step is absolutely critical.
Well, it happened in a few distinct steps, like a playbook. First, you use nationalism as a weapon to silence anyone who disagrees. You criticize the plan for expansion, boom, you're unpatriotic. This totally cuts the legs out from under civilian politicians who are pushing for diplomacy. As their authority crumbled, the military leaders just stepped right into that power vacuum.
And they did it by claiming that their aggressive plans were what the emperor really wanted. And just like that, the military basically hijacked the country's foreign policy.
And this is a really crucial point, which historian Richard J. Smethurst drives home. He says nationalism didn't just support militarism, it enabled it institutionally. In other words, it wasn't just about getting people to cheer for the army. It fundamentally changed the rules of the political game itself. It gave the military the perfect cover to push aside the civilian government and just take the wheel.
Okay, but this brings us to a huge, classic debate for historians. It's kind of like a chicken and egg question. Was this whole nationalist ideology the real cause of Japan's aggression, or was it just a convenient excuse? A tool that leaders used to get public support for policies that were really about practical things like grabbing land and resources. This is a big one, and historians are still debating.
So the debate pretty much breaks down into two main camps. On one side, you have scholars like John W. Dower, who argue that nationalism was the primary driver. For them, the ideology itself was so powerful that it created a reality where war just seemed like the only logical, even moral option. But on the other side, you've got historians like Akira Irie. They see nationalism more as a tool, a handy justification that leaders pulled out to get everyone on board with expansion that, at its heart, was all about economics and strategy.
So you've got these two different ways of looking at it, the cause or the tool. With that in mind, what's the final verdict? What was the true role of nationalism in all of this? Let's try and pull all these threads together.
Maybe the best way to look at it is this. Nationalism wasn't the only cause, but it was the essential catalyst. Think of it like a fire. The economic needs, the strategic goals, that was the kindling, the fuel that was already there. But nationalism, that was the gasoline poured on top. It didn't start the fire, but it made it explode, accelerating and radicalizing everything, pushing Japan down a path that was way more extreme than it might have been otherwise.
So if we had to boil this entire analysis down to one core idea, it's this. Japanese nationalism didn't, by itself, cause the country's expansion. Its real power was in how it completely warped the political landscape. It made compromise look like treason, it handed the keys to the military, and it sold imperial conquest as a noble, moral mission. It didn't create the conflict out of thin air, but it absolutely supercharged it and made it all but inevitable.
And that leaves us with a final question, one that goes way beyond this specific chapter of history. Because this whole story is really about a timeless and incredibly powerful force. How does the story a nation tells about itself, its story of who it is, what it's owed, and what its destiny is, end up shaping what it actually does on the world stage? It's a question that was critical then, and you better believe it's just as relevant today.